Everyone knows the Roman Empire didn't fall in a single night. It crumbled over centuries, chipped away by invasions, corruption, and rebellion. But what if I told you that one of those rebellions, one that could have torn the empire apart decades earlier, was stopped not by a legion, not by an emperor's decree, but by a morning fog, and that this wasn't some poetic flourish in a historian's diary, but a recorded, verifiable event from 69 CE, during one of the most chaotic years in Roman history, the year of the four emperors. Our investigation begins with a man named Gaius Julius Civilis, a Batavian chieftain and veteran of Rome's auxiliary forces. Civilis had served the empire for years, fighting in campaigns from Britannia to Germania, but he was no loyal servant. The Batavians, his people, were a Germanic tribe living in what is now the Netherlands, valued by Rome for their ferocity in battle. They were exempt from most taxes but expected to provide soldiers for Rome's endless wars. By the late 60s CE, resentment was growing. Civilis himself had been imprisoned on suspicion of treason by Emperor Nero, then released when Nero's reign collapsed in 68 CE. Civilis returned home to a province on the edge of revolt. The perfect storm was brewing. After Nero's suicide, Rome was thrown into chaos. Galba seized power but was murdered within months, replaced by Otho, who was in turn defeated by Vitellius, who was then challenged by Vespasian. While legions marched and fought over the purple in Italy, the provinces were left dangerously underdefended. Civilis saw his moment. In early 69 CE, he began secretly uniting the Batavians, neighboring tribes, and even discontented Roman soldiers stationed along the Rhine. His goal: to free his people from Rome and establish a Batavian-led confederation in the north. The key to his plan lay in striking at night, taking control of the vital fortress of Castra Vetera, modern-day Xanten, Germany, where 2 Roman legions were stationed. If he could seize the fortress quickly, it would send a shockwave across the provinces. Here's where the story gets strange. Tacitus, our main source for this episode, records that Civilis's forces had timed their assault for a specific morning when they expected clear conditions. They needed visibility to coordinate between small raiding parties coming from different directions along the Rhine. Scouts had reported that the air had been dry for days. No fog had rolled in from the river in over a fortnight. But that morning, just before dawn, a dense, heavy mist settled over the camp and the riverbank. Visibility dropped to a few paces, and for a force relying on speed, surprise, and signals, that was a disaster. The Batavian warbands could hear each other's horn calls, but they couldn't see the signal fires meant to synchronize the attack. Civilis's plan depended on multiple breaches happening simultaneously to overwhelm the fortress. Instead, small groups blundered into Roman patrols in the dark whiteness. The Romans, initially startled, quickly realized the advantage the fog gave them. The defenders lit torches only within the walls, making themselves seem like phantom shapes to the attackers. Legionaries used the muffled sound to mask their movements, setting up ambush points along the ramparts. Several Batavian units, disoriented and unable to locate the gates, wandered too close to the western side of the fortress, where the Romans unleashed a sudden volley of pila from above, breaking their formation. By sunrise, the fog began to lift, revealing a disaster for Civilis. His element of surprise was gone, and the garrison, Legio Viva Laudi and Legio Septimius Primigenia, had rallied in full strength. The Batavians retreated, but the damage to their momentum was deeper than just one failed attack. Word spread quickly that the gods, or perhaps the river itself, had sided with Rome. This emboldened loyalist forces in the region and bought the empire critical weeks to organize a counteroffensive. Now, here's the detective work. Why did the fog appear that morning, breaking a long, dry spell? Geographers and climate historians point to the unusual weather patterns during that year. In the summer of 69 CE, heavy rains upstream had raised the water levels of the Rhine and its tributaries. When the weather suddenly cooled overnight, the warm moisture rising from the river met the cold morning air, perfect conditions for an advection fog. The Batavians had relied on their own experience of the river's patterns, but the recent rains created a microclimate they hadn't accounted for. In other words, it wasn't divine intervention, it was meteorology. Yet to the Romans in Castra Vetera, this was nothing short of providence. And here's where the chain reaction becomes fascinating. Civilis wasn't finished. He regrouped, laid siege to Castra Vetera later that year, and eventually captured it after months of fighting. But by then, the political chaos in Rome had settled. Vespasian had taken the throne in December 69 CE, and his generals moved swiftly to restore order along the Rhine. If the Batavians had taken the fortress in that first surprise strike, before Vespasian consolidated power, they might have inspired a full-scale provincial rebellion, forcing Rome to divert troops from other critical fronts. That could have left the Danube provinces exposed to Dacian raids or emboldened Parthia to test the eastern borders. Instead, the fog's delay meant the rebellion was just one more problem for Rome to solve, not the fatal blow it might have been. And the irony? Roman records from the fortress describe the fog as a white wall sent by Jupiter to guard his people, while Batavian oral traditions speak of it as the river's jealousy, refusing to let its warriors see their prey. Both sides mythologized a simple weather event, but for historians like us, the real story is how that weather event shifted the timing of an entire military campaign, and with it, the trajectory of the empire's northern frontier. In the next part, we'll follow the ripple effects, how that one morning's delay changed the fates of the legions involved, altered Civilis' standing among his allies, and even influenced Rome's military policy in the provinces for decades to come. The failed assault in the fog left deep political scars. Civilis' allies began questioning his leadership. The Free Sea and some of the Cananophates who had joined his coalition with the promise of swift victory started pulling back their support. Even within the Batavian ranks, whispers spread that the gods were displeased, that the omens had been misread. Ancient warfare thrived on momentum, and once the aura of inevitability was gone, holding a coalition together became harder than winning a battle. For the Romans, the psychological effect was the opposite. Commanders Marcus Hordionius Flaccus and Vocula used the unexpected reprieve to secure supply lines along the Rhine, pulling reinforcements from nearby forts like Noviomagus, modern Nijmegen, and Bonabon. They repaired fortifications, increased river patrols, and even sent small units upriver to disrupt Batavian crossings. It wasn't enough to crush the rebellion outright, but it transformed the situation from a sudden crisis into a manageable campaign. What fascinates me is how the fog's timing rippled through decisions months later. When Civilis finally besieged Castra Vetera later in 69 CE, the Romans were far better prepared. The siege dragged on into the following year, forcing Civilis into a prolonged war of attrition rather than a decisive coup. Tacitus tells us that the defenders held out in part because of their stockpiled supplies that had been brought in during those precious weeks bought by the fog. Without them, the fortress might have fallen in days, energizing other tribes and turning the Rhine frontier into a full-scale breakaway zone. And here's another domino: Vespasian's rise to power. In December 69 CE, just as the siege was grinding on, Vespasian became emperor and quickly dispatched trusted commanders like Quintus Petilius Carialis to restore order in the north. Carialis' campaign in 70 CE was brutal but effective. He retook the fortresses, broke the Batavian alliance, and negotiated a settlement that, while leaving Civilis alive, reasserted Rome's dominance in the region. If the Batavians had succeeded in that first assault months earlier, Vespasian might have faced a far more fragmented empire on his accession, with multiple provinces in open revolt. In such a scenario, his consolidation of power could have taken years, or failed altogether, leaving Rome vulnerable to enemies on every border. Let's pull back and think about the mechanics here. One weather event, a fog bank forming over the Rhine, didn't end the Batavian revolt, but it disrupted its opening move enough to shift the rhythm of the conflict. In military terms, timing is often more decisive than numbers. Think of it like a chess match. If your opponent's key opening move is delayed, even for a single turn, your entire defensive structure changes. And when that delay happens in the opening phase of a rebellion, it can determine whether the uprising becomes an empire-wide crisis or a localized disturbance. The Romans understood this, even if they attributed the cause to divine favor. In official inscriptions and letters, the fog was often described in religious terms. There's a bronze tablet found near Cologne that records the gratitude of the local garrison to Jupiter Optimus Maximus for the mist that veiled the enemy. Whether propaganda or genuine belief, the message was clear. The empire survived because it was protected by the gods, by fate, by something greater than chance. But in reality, it was the Rhine's own geography and weather patterns that played the deciding role. It's here we arrive at our eureka moment. The key wasn't just that the fog appeared. It's that it appeared after an unusually wet period that raised river humidity, combined with a sudden drop in temperature overnight. This was not a regular occurrence. It was the result of a very specific set of meteorological conditions that the Batavian scouts misjudged. It's tempting to see Civilis' failure as bad luck, But really, it was a failure of intelligence gathering. A different choice, postponing the attack by even a day, might have produced a very different history. And yet, if Civilis had succeeded, the repercussions could have stretched far beyond the Rhine. A destabilized northern frontier might have encouraged the Dacians to cross the Danube, or the Parthians to push into Syria, or even sparked unrest in Gaul and Britannia. The Roman Empire's delicate balance in 69 CE, already strained by civil war, could have tipped into fragmentation decades before the traditional narrative of decline begins. Instead, thanks to a weather event lasting only a few hours, the empire bought itself more than 2 centuries before the Rhine frontier truly collapsed. That's the irony of history. Colossal empires can hinge on something as fleeting as a morning mist. So the next time you picture Rome's legions standing unshakable against barbarian hordes, remember this: sometimes it wasn't discipline, tactics, or steel that saved the empire. Sometimes it was the quiet, unplanned intervention of nature itself. And that's why we tell these stories. Because in history, the smallest details, overlooked in the moment, can turn out to be the hinges upon which everything else swings. If you've enjoyed uncovering the hidden chain of events behind Rome's survival that morning, give this video a like, share it with someone who loves untold history, and subscribe to the Domino Effect. Here, we look beyond the surface to find the mechanisms, the coincidences, and the fragile moments that shaped our world, reminding us that history's biggest outcomes can start with the smallest shifts in the air.